One ring to rule them all. One ring to find them. One ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. It is only 2 lines of a verse long known in elven lore. 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky. 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone. 9 for mortal men doomed to die. 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne, in the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie. 1 ring to rule them all. 1 ring to find them. 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them, in the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie.
He paused, and then said slowly in a deep voice,
This is the Master Ring, the 1 ring to rule them all. This is the 1 ring that he lost many ages ago to the great weakening of his power. He greatly desires it, but he must not get it.
Frodo sat silent and motionless. Fear seemed to stretch out a vast hand, like a dark cloud rising in the east and looming up to engulf him.
This ring,
He stammered.
how on earth did it come to me?
Said Gandalf.
That is a very long story. The beginnings lie back in the Black Years, which only the lore masters now remember. If I were to tell you all that tale, we should be sitting here when spring had passed into winter. But last night I told you of Sauron the Great, the Dark Lord. The rumors that you have heard are true. He has indeed arisen again and left his hold in Mirkwood and returned to his ancient fortress in the Dark Tower of Mordor. That name even you hobbits have heard of, like a shadow on the borders of old stories. Always after a defeat and a respite, the shadow takes another shape and grows again.
I wish it need not have happened in my time.
Said Frodo.
So do I,
Said Gandalf.
and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. And already, Frodo, our time is beginning to look black. The enemy is fast becoming very strong. His plans are far from ripe, I think, but they are ripening. We shall be hard put to it. We should be very hard put to it, even if it were not for this dreadful chance. The enemy still lacks one thing to give him strength and knowledge to beat down all resistance, break the last defenses, and cover all the lands in a second darkness. He lacks the 1 ring. The 3, fairest of all the elf lords, hid from him, and his hand never touched them or sullied them. 7 the dwarf kings possessed. The 3 he has recovered, and the others the dragons have consumed. 9 he gave to mortal men proud and great, and so ensnared them. Long ago they fell under the dominion of the 1, and they became ring wraiths, shadows under his great shadow, his most terrible servants. Long ago. It is many a year since the 9 walked abroad, yet who knows? As the shadow grows once more, they too may walk again. But come, we will not speak of such things, even in the morning of the Shire. So it is now. The 9 he has gathered to himself, the 7 also, or else they are destroyed. The 3 are hidden still, but that no longer troubles him. He only needs the 1. For he made that ring himself. It is his, and he let a great part of his own former power pass into it, so that he could rule all the others. If he recovers it, then he will command them all again, wherever they be, even the 3. and all that has been wrought with them will be laid bare, and he will be stronger than ever. And this is the dreadful chance, Frodo. He believed that the One had perished, that the elves had destroyed it, as should have been done. But he knows now that it has not perished, that it has been found. So he is seeking it, and all his thought is bent on it. It is his great hope, and our great fear.
Why wasn't it destroyed?
Cried Frodo.
And how did the enemy ever come to loose it if it was so strong and it was so precious to him?
He clutched the ring in his hand, as if he saw already dark fingers snatching out to seize it.
It was taken from him,
said Gandalf.
The strength of the elves to resist him was greater long ago, and not all men were estranged from them. The men of Westerness came to their aid. That is a chapter of ancient history which it might be good to recall, for there was sorrow then too, and gathering dark. But great valor and great deeds that were not wholly vain. One day, perhaps, I will tell you all that tale, or you shall hear it told in full by one who knows it best. But for the moment, since most of all you need to know how this thing came to you, and that will be tale enough. This is all I will say. It was Gil-galad, Elven King, and Elendil of Westerness who overthrew Sauron, though they themselves perished in the deed. And Isildur, Elendil's son, cut the ring from Sauron's hand, and took it for his own. Then Sauron was vanquished, and his spirit fled and was hidden for long years, until his shadow took shape again in Mirkwood. But the ring was lost. It fell into the great river Anduin, and vanished. For Isildur was marching north along the east banks of the river, and near the Gladden fields he was waylaid by the orcs of the mountains, and almost all his folk were slain. He leapt into the waters, but the ring slipped from his finger as he swam, and then the orcs saw him, and killed him with arrows.
Gandalf paused.
And there in the dark pools amid the Gladden fields,
he said,
the ring passed out of knowledge and legend. And even so much of its history is known now only to a few, and the Council of the Wise could discover no more. But at last, I can carry on the story, I think. Long after, but still very long ago, there lived by the banks of the great river on the edge of Wilderland a clever-handed and quiet-footed little people. I guess they were of Hobbit kind, akin to the fathers of the Stoors, for they loved the river, and often swam in it, or made little boats of reeds. There was among them a family of high repute, for it was large and wealthier than most, and it was ruled by a grandmother of the folk, stern and wise in old lore, such as they had. The most inquisitive and curious-minded of that family was called Smeagol. He was interested in roots and beginnings, and dived into deep pools. He burrowed under trees and growing plants. He tunneled into green mounds, and he ceased to look up at the hilltops, over the leaves on the trees, or the flowers opening in the air. His head and his eyes were downward. He had a friend called Deagle, of similar sort, sharper-eyed but not so quick and strong. On a time they took a boat and went down to the Gladden fields, where there were great beds of iris and flowering reeds. There Smeagol got out and went nosing about the banks, but Deagle sat in the boat and fished. Suddenly a great fish took his hook, and before he knew where he was dragged out and down into the water to the bottom. Then he let go of his line, for he thought he saw something shining in the riverbed. And holding his breath, he grabbed at it. Then up he came, spluttering, with weeds in his hair and a handful of mud, and he swam to the bank. And behold, when he washed the mud away, there in his hand lay a beautiful golden ring, and it shone and glittered in the sun, so that his heart was glad. But Smeagol had been watching him from behind a tree, and as Deagle gloated over the ring, Smeagol came softly up behind.
Give us that, Deagle, my love,
said Smeagol over his friend's shoulder.
Why?
Said Deagle.
Because it's my birthday, my love. And I want it,
said Smeagol.
I don't care,
said Deagle.
I've given you a present already. More than I could afford. I found this, and I'm going to keep it. Are you indeed, my love?
Said Smeagol, and he caught Deagle by the throat and strangled him, because the gold looked so bright and beautiful. Then he put the ring on his finger. No one ever found out what had become of Deagle. He was murdered far from home, and his body was cunningly hidden. But Smeagol returned alone, and he found that none of his family could see him when he was wearing the ring. He was very pleased with his discovery, and he concealed it, and he used it to find out secrets, and he put his knowledge to crooked and malicious uses. He became sharp-eyed and keen-eared for all that was hurtful. The ring had given him power according to his stature. It is not to be wondered at that he became very unpopular and was shunned, when visible, by all his relations. They kicked him, and he bit their feet. He took to thieving and going about muttering to himself and gurgling in his throat. So they called him Gollum, and cursed him, and told him to go far away. And his grandmother, desiring peace, expelled him from the family and turned him out of their home. He wandered in loneliness, weeping a little for the hardness of the world, and he journeyed up the river till he came to a stream that flowed down from the mountains, and he went that way. He caught fish in deep pools with invisible fingers and ate them raw. One day it was very hot, and as he was bending over a pool, he felt a burning on the back of his head, and a dazzling light from the water pained his wet eyes. He wondered at it, for he had almost forgotten about the sun. Then for a last time he looked up and shook his fist at her. But as he lowered his eyes, he saw far above the tops of the misty mountains, out of which the stream came. And he thought suddenly, it would be cool and shady under those mountains. The sun could not watch me there. The roots of those mountains must be roots indeed. There must be great secrets buried there which have not been discovered since the beginning. So he journeyed by night up into the highlands, and he found a little cave out of which the dark stream ran. And he wormed his way like a maggot into the heart of the hills and vanished out of all knowledge. The ring went into the shadows with him, and even the Maker, when his power had begun to grow again, could learn nothing of it.
Gollum!
cried Frodo.
Gollum? Do you mean that this is the very Gollum creature that Bilbo met? How loathsome.
I think it is a sad story, said the wizard. It might have happened to others, even to some hobbits that I have known.
I can't believe that Gollum was connected with hobbits, however distantly,
said Frodo with some heat.
What an abominable notion.
It is true all the same,
replied Gandalf.
About their origins at any rate. I know more than hobbits do themselves, and even Bilbo's stories suggest the kinship. There was a great deal in the background of their minds and memories that was very similar. They understood one another remarkably well. Very much better than a hobbit would understand, say, a dwarf or an orc, or even an elf. Think of the riddles they both knew, for one thing.
Yes,
said Frodo.
Though other folk beside Hobbit asked riddles, and much of the same sort. And hobbits don't cheat. Gollum meant to cheat all the time. He was just trying to put poor Bilbo off his guard. And I dare say it amused his wickedness to start a game which might end in providing him with an easy victim, but if he lost would not hurt him.
Only too true, I fear,
said Gandalf.
But there was something else in it, I think, which you do not see yet. Even Gollum was not wholly ruined. He had proved tougher than even one of the wise would have guessed. As a hobbit might. There was a little corner of his mind that was still his own, and light came through it as through a chink in the dark, light out of the past. It was actually pleasant, I think, to hear a kindly voice again, bringing up memories of wind and trees, sun of the grass and such forgotten things. That, of course, could only make the evil part of him angrier in the end. Unless it could be conquered, unless it could be cured.
Gandalf sighed.
Alas, there is little hope of that for him, yet not no hope. No, not though he possessed the ring so long, almost as far back as he can remember, for it was long since he had worn it much. In the black darkness it was seldom needed. Certainly he had never faded. He is thin and tough still, but the thing was eating up his mind, of course, and the torment had become almost unbearable. All the great secrets under the mountains had turned out to be just an empty night. There was nothing more to find out. Nothing worth doing. Only nasty, furtive eating and resentful remembering. He was altogether wretched. He hated the dark, and he hated the light more. He hated everything, and the ring most of all.
Well, what do you mean?
Said Frodo.
Surely the ring was his precious and the only thing he cared for. But if he hated it, why didn't he get rid of it, or go away, and leave it?
You ought to begin to understand, Frodo, after all you have heard,
said Gandalf.
He hated and loved it, as he hated and loved himself. He could not get rid of it. He had no will left in the matter. A ring of power looks after itself, Frodo. It may slip off treacherously, but its keeper never abandons it. At most, he plays with the idea of handing it to someone else's care, and that only at an early stage, when it first begins to grip. But as far as I know, Bilbo alone in history has ever gone beyond playing, and really done it. He needed all my help too. And even so, he would never have just forsaken it, or cast it aside. It was not Gollum, Frodo, but the ring itself that decided things. The ring left him.
What, just in time to meet Bilbo?
Said Frodo.
Wouldn't an orc have suited it better?
This is no laughing matter,
said Gandalf.
Not for you. It was the strangest event in the whole history of the ring so far. Bilbo's arrival just at that time and putting his hand on it, blindly, in the dark. There was more than one power at work, Frodo. The ring was trying to get back to its master. It had slipped from Isildur's hand and betrayed him, and when chance came, it caught poor Deagle, and he was murdered. And after that, Gollum, and it had devoured him. It could make no further use of him. He was too small and mean. And as long as it stayed with him, he would never leave his deep pool again. So now, when its master was awake once more and sending out his dark thought from Mirkwood, it abandoned Gollum, only to be picked up by the most unlikely person imaginable. Bilbo, from the Shire. Behind that there was something else at work, beyond any design of the ring maker. I can put it to no plainer than by saying that Bilbo was meant to find the ring, and not by its maker. In which case, you also were meant to have it. And that may be an encouraging thought.
It is not,
said Frodo.
though I'm not sure that I understand you. But how have you learned all this about the ring? And about Gollum? Do you really know it all, or are you just guessing still?
Gandalf looked at Frodo. His eyes glinted.
I knew much, and I have learned much,
he answered.
But I am not going to give an account of all my doings to you. The history of Elendil and Isildur and the One Ring is known to all the wise. Your ring is shown to be that one ring by the fire writing alone, apart from any other evidence.
And when did you discover that?
Asked Frodo, interrupting.
Just now in this room, of course,
answered the wizard sharply.
But I expected to find it. I have come back from dark journeys and long search to make that final test. It is the last proof, and all is now only too clear. Making out Gollum's part and fitting it into the gap in the history required some thought. I may have started with guesses about Gollum, but I am not guessing now. I know. I have seen him.
You've seen Gollum? Exclaimed Frodo with amazement.
Yes. The obvious thing to do, of course, if one could. I tried long ago, but I have managed at last.
Then what happened after Bilbo escaped from him? Do you know that?
Not so clearly. What I have told you is what Gollum was willing to tell, though not, of course, in the way that I have reported it. Gollum is a liar. And you have to sift his words. For instance, he called the ring his birthday present, and he stuck to that. He said it came from his grandmother, who had lots of beautiful things of that kind. A ridiculous story. I have no doubt that Smeagol's grandmother was a matriarch, a great person in her way, but to talk of her possessing many elven rings was absurd. And as for giving them away, it was a lie. But a lie with a grain of truth. The murder of Deagle haunted Gollum, and he had made up a defense, repeating it to his precious over and over again as he gnawed bones in the dark, until he almost believed it. It was his birthday. Deagle ought to have given the ring to him. It had previously turned up just so as to be a present. It was his birthday present, so on and on. I endured him as long as I could, but the truth was desperately important, and in the end I had to be harsh. I put the fear of fire on him, and wrung the true story out of him, bit by bit, together with much snivelling and snarling. He thought he was misunderstood and ill-used, but when he had at last told me his history, as far as the end of the riddle game and Bilbo's escape, he would not say any more, except in dark hints. Some other fear was on him greater than mine. He muttered that he was going to get his own back. People would see if he would stand being kicked and driven into a hole and then robbed. Gollum had good friends now. Good friends, and very strong. They would help him. Baggins would pay for it. That was his chief thought. He hated Bilbo and cursed his name. What is more, he knew where he came from.
But how did he find that out? Asked Frodo.
Well, as for the name, Bilbo very foolishly told Gollum himself. And after that, it would not be difficult to discover his country once Gollum came out. Oh yes, he came out. His longing for the ring proved stronger than his fear of the orcs, or even the light. After a year or two, he left the mountains. You see, though still bound by desire of it, the ring was no longer devouring him. He began to revive a little. He felt old, terribly old, yet less timid, and he was mortally hungry. Light of sun and moon, he still feared and hated, and he always will, I think. But he was cunning. He found out he could hide from daylight and moonshine and make his way swiftly and softly by dead of night with his pale, cold eyes and catch small, frightened or unwary things. He grew stronger and bolder with new food and new air. He found his way into Mirkwood, as one would expect.
Is that where you found him? Asked Frodo.
I saw him there,
answered Gandalf.
But before that he had wandered far, following Bilbo's trail. It was difficult to learn anything from him for certain, for his talk was constantly interrupted by curses and threats.
What has it got in its pockets?
He said,
It wouldn't say no, precious little cheat. Not a fair question. It cheated first, it did. It broke the rules. We ought to have squeezed it. Yes, precious, and we will, precious.
That is a sample of his talk. I don't suppose you want any more. I had weary days of it. But from hints dropped among the snarls, I even gathered that his padding feet had taken him at last to Esgaroth, and even to the streets of Dale, listening secretly and peering. Well, the news of the great events went far and wide in Wilderland, and many had heard Bilbo's name and knew where he came from. We had made no secret of our return journey to his home in the west. Gollum's sharp ears would soon learn what he wanted.
Then why didn't he track Bilbo further?
Asked Frodo.
Why didn't he come to the Shire?
Ah,
said Gandalf.
now we come to it. I think Gollum tried to. He set out and came back westward, as far as the Great River. But then he turned aside. He was not daunted by the distance, I am sure. No, something else drew him away. So my friends think, those that hunted him for me. The Wood Elves tracked him first, an easy task for them, for his trail was still fresh then. Through Mirkwood and back again it led them, though they never caught him. The wood was full of the rumour of him, dreadful tales, even among beasts and birds. The woodmen said that there was some new terror abroad, a ghost that drank blood. It climbed trees to find nests. It crept into holes to find the young. It slipped through windows to find cradles. But at the western edge of Mirkwood, the trail turned away. It wandered off southwards and passed out of the Wood Elves' ken, and was lost. And then I made a great mistake. Yes, Frodo, and not the first. I fear it may prove the worst. I let the matter be. I let him go, for I had much else to think of at that time, and I still trusted the lore of Saruman. Well, that was years ago. I have paid for it since with many dark and dangerous days. The trail was long cold when I took it up again after Bilbo left here, and my search would have been in vain but for the help that I had from a friend. Aragorn, the greatest traveller and huntsman of this age of the world. Together we sought for Gollum down the whole length of Wilderland, without hope and without success. And at last, when I had given up the chase and turned to other parts, Gollum was found. My friend returned out of great perils, bringing the miserable creature with him. What he had been doing he would not say. He only wept and called us cruel, with many a Gollum in his throat. And when we pressed him, he whined and cringed and rubbed his long hands, licking his fingers as if they pained him, as if he remembered some old torture. But I'm afraid there is no possible doubt he had made his slow, sneaking way, step by step, mile by mile, south, down at last, to the land of Mordor.
A heavy silence fell in the room. Frodo could hear his heart beating. Even outside everything seemed still. No sound of Sam's shears could now be heard.
Yes, to Mordor,
said Gandalf.
Alas, Mordor draws all wicked things, and the dark power was bending all its will to gather them there. The ring of the enemy would leave its mark too, leave him open to the summons. And all folk were whispering then of the new shadow in the south, and its hatred of the west. There were his fine new friends who would help him in his revenge. Wretched fool! In that land he would learn much, too much for his comfort, and sooner or later as he lurked and pried on the borders, he would be caught and taken for examination. That was the way of it, I fear. When he was found, he had already been there long, and was on his way back, on some errand of mischief, but that does not matter much now. His worst mischief was done. Yes, alas, through him the enemy has learned that the One has been found again. He knows where Isildur fell. He knows where Gollum found his ring. He knows that it is a great ring, for it gave long life. He knows that it is not one of the three, for they have never been lost, and they endure no evil. He knows that it is not one of the 7 or the 9, for they are accounted for. He knows that it is the One, and he has at last heard, I think, of hobbits and the Shire. The Shire. He may be seeking for it now, if he has not already found out where it lies. Indeed, Frodo, I fear that he may even think that the long-unnoticed name of Baggins has become important.
But this is terrible,
cried Frodo.
far worse than the worst that I imagined from your hints and warnings. Oh, Gandalf, best of friends, what am I to do? For now I am really afraid. What am I to do? What a pity that Bilbo did not stab the vile creature when he had the chance.
Pity and mercy. Not to strike without need. And he has been well rewarded, Frodo. Be sure that he took so little hurt from the evil and escaped in the end, because he began his ownership of the ring so. With pity.
I'm sorry,
said Frodo.
but I am frightened. And I do not feel any pity for Gollum.
You have not seen him.
Gandalf broke in.
No, and I don't want to.
Said Frodo.
I can't understand you. Do you mean to say that you and the elves have let him live on after all those horrible deeds? Now at any rate he is as bad as an orc, and just an enemy. He deserves death.
Deserves it? I dare say he does. Many that live deserve death, and some that die deserve life. Can you give it to them? Then do not be too eager to deal out death and judgment, for even the very wise cannot see all ends. I have not much hope that Gollum can be cured before he dies, but there is a chance of it, and he is bound up with the fate of the ring. My heart tells me that he has some part to play yet, for good or ill, before the end. And when that comes, the pity of Bilbo may rule the fate of many, yours not least. In any case, we did not kill him. He is very old and very wretched. The Wood Elves have him in prison, where they treat him with such kindness as they can find in their wise hearts.
All the same,
said Frodo.
even if Bilbo could not kill Gollum, I wish he had not kept the ring. I wish he had never found it and that I had not got it. Why did you let me keep it? Why didn't you make me throw it away or destroy it?
Let you? Make you?
Said the wizard.
Haven't you been listening to all that I've said? You are not thinking of what you are saying. But as for throwing it away, that was obviously wrong. These rings have a way of becoming found. In evil hands it might have done great evil. Worst of all, it might have fallen into the hands of the enemy. Indeed, it certainly would, for this is the one, and he is exerting all his power to find it, or draw it to himself. Of course, my dear Frodo, it was dangerous for you, and that has troubled me deeply, but there was so much at stake that I had to take some risk, though even when I was far away, there has never been a day when the Shire has not been guarded by watchful eyes. As long as you never used it, I did not think that the ring would have any lasting effect on you. Not for evil, not at any rate for a very long time. And you must remember that 9 years ago when I last saw you, I still knew little for certain.
But why not destroy it as you say should have been done long ago?
Cried Frodo again.
If you had warned me or even sent me a word message, I would have done away with it.
Would you? How would you do that? Have you ever tried?
No, but I suppose one could hammer it or melt it.
Try!
Said Gandalf.
Try now!
Frodo drew the ring out of his pocket again and looked at it. It now appeared plain and smooth, without mark or device that he could see. The gold looked very fair and pure, and Frodo thought how rich and beautiful was its colour, how perfect was its roundness. It was an admirable thing, and altogether precious. When he took it out, he had intended to fling it from him into the very hottest part of the fire, but he found now that he could not do so, not without a great struggle. He weighed the ring in his hand, hesitating, and forcing himself to remember all that Gandalf had told him, and then with an effort of will he made a movement as if to cast it away, but he found that he had put it back in his pocket. Gandalf laughed grimly.
You see? Already you too, Frodo, cannot easily let it go, nor will to damage it. And I could not make you, except by force, which would break your mind. But as for breaking the ring, force is useless. Even if you took it and struck it with a heavy sledgehammer, it would make no dint in it. It cannot be unmade by your hands, or by mine. Your small fire, of course, would not melt even ordinary gold. This ring has already passed through it unscathed, and even unheated. But there is no smith's forge in the Shire that could change it at all. Not even the anvils and furnaces of the dwarfs could do that. It has been said that dragonfire could melt and consume the rings of power, but there is not now any dragon left on Earth in which the old fire is hot enough. Nor was there ever any dragon, not even Ancalagon the Black, who could have harmed the One Ring, the ruling ring, for that was made by Sauron himself. There is only one way. To find the cracks of doom in the depths of Orodruin, the Fire Mountain, and cast the ring in there if you really wish to destroy it. To put it beyond the grasp of the enemy forever.
I do really wish to destroy it,
cried Frodo.
Oh, well, to have it destroyed. I am not made for perilous quests. I wish I had never seen the ring. Why did it come to me? Why was I chosen?
Such questions cannot be answered, said Gandalf. You may be sure that it was not for any merit that others do not possess, not for power or wisdom at any rate. But you have been chosen, and you must therefore use such strength and heart and wits as you have.
But I have so little of any of these things. You are wise and powerful. Will you not take the ring?
No!
Cried Gandalf, springing to his feet.
With that power I should have power too great and terrible. And over me, the ring would gain a power still greater and more deadly.
His eyes flashed and his face was lit by a fire within.
Do not tempt me, for I do not wish to become like the Dark Lord himself. Yet the way of the ring to my heart is by pity. Pity for weakness and the desire of strength to do good. Do not tempt me. I dare not take it. Not even to keep it safe, unused. The wish to wield it would be too great for my strength. I shall have such need of it. Great perils lie before me.
He went to the windows and drew aside the curtains and the shutters. Sunlight streamed back again into the room. Sam passed along the path outside, whistling.
And now,
said the wizard, turning back to Frodo,
the decision lies with you. But I will always help you.
He laid his hand on Frodo's shoulder.
I will help you bear this burden, as long as it is yours to bear. We must do something soon. The enemy is moving.
There was a long silence. Gandalf sat down again and puffed at his pipe, as if lost in thought. His eyes seemed closed, but under the lids he was watching Frodo intently. Frodo gazed fixedly at the red embers of the hearth, until they filled all his vision, and he seemed to be looking down into profound wells of fire. He was thinking of the fabled cracks of doom, and the terror of the fiery mountain.
Well,
said Gandalf at last.
What are you thinking about? Have you decided what to do?
No,
answered Frodo, coming back to himself out of darkness, and finding to his surprise that it was not dark, and that out of the window he could see the sunlit garden.
Or perhaps, yes. As far as I understand what you have said, I suppose I must keep the ring and guard it, at least for the present, whatever it may do to me.
Whatever it may do, it will be slow. Slow to evil if you keep it with that purpose,
said Gandalf.
I hope so,
said Frodo.
But I hope that you may find some other better keeper soon. But in the meantime it seems that I am a danger to all that live near me. I cannot keep the ring and stay here. I ought to leave Back End. Leave the Shire. Leave everything and go away.
He sighed.
I should like to save the Shire if I could, though there have been times when I thought the inhabitants too stupid and dull for words, and have felt that an earthquake or an invasion of dragons might be good for them. But I don't feel like that now. I feel that as long as the Shire lies behind, safe and comfortable, I shall find wandering more bearable. I shall know that somewhere there is a firm foothold, even if my feet cannot stand there again. Of course, I have sometimes thought of going away, but I imagined it as a kind of holiday, a series of adventures like Bilbo's or better, ending in peace. But this would mean exile, a flight from danger into danger, drawing it after me. And I suppose I must go alone if I am to do that and save the Shire. But I feel very small, and very uprooted, and, well, desperate. The enemy is so strong and terrible.
He did not tell Gandalf, but as he was speaking, a great desire to follow Bilbo flamed up in his heart. To follow Bilbo, and even perhaps to find him again. It was so strong that it overcame his fear. He could almost have run out there and then down the road without his hat, as Bilbo had done on a similar morning long ago.
My dear Frodo,
Exclaimed Gandalf.
hobbits really are amazing creatures, as I have said before. You can learn all that there is to know about their ways in a month, and yet after 100 years, they can still surprise you at a pinch. I hardly expected to get such an answer, not even from you. But Bilbo made no mistake in choosing his heir, though he little thought how important it would prove. I'm afraid you are right. The ring will not be able to stay hidden in the Shire much longer, and for your own sake, as well as for others, you will have to go, and leave the name of Baggins behind you. That name will not be safe to have outside the Shire, or in the wild. I will give you a travelling name now. When you go as Mr. Underhill. But I don't think you need to go alone. Not if you know anyone you can trust, and who would be willing to go by your side, and that you would be willing to take into unknown perils. But if you look for a companion, be careful in choosing, and be careful of what you say, even to your closest friends. The enemy has many spies and many ways of hearing.
Suddenly he stopped as if listening. Frodo became aware that all was very quiet, inside and outside. Gandalf crept to one side of the window. Then with a dart he sprang to the sill, and thrust a long arm out and downwards. There was a squawk, and up came Sam Gamgee's curly head, hauled by one ear.
Well, well, bless my beard,
Said Gandalf.
Sam Gamgee, is it now? What may you be doing?
Lord bless you, Mr. Gandalf, sir. Nothing. Leastways, I was just trimming the grass border under the window, if you follow me.
He picked up the shears and exhibited them as evidence,
I don't.
said Gandalf grimly.
It is some time since I heard the sound of your shears. How long have you been eavesdropping?
Eavesdropping, sir. I don't follow you, begging your pardon. There ain't no eaves in Bag End, and that's a fact.
Don't be a fool. What have you heard, and why did you listen?
Gandalf's eyes flashed and his brows stuck out like bristles.
Mr. Frodo, sir.
Cried Sam, quaking.
Don't let him hurt me, sir. Don't let him turn me into anything unnatural. My old dad would take it, sir. I meant no harm. Oh, my honour, sir. He won't hurt you,
said Frodo, hardly able to keep from laughing, although he was himself startled and rather puzzled.
He knows as well as I do that you mean no harm. But just you up and answer his question straight away. Well, sir,
said Sam, dithering a little.
I heard a great deal that I didn't rightly understand. About an enemy, and rings, and Mr. Bilbo, sir, and dragons, and a fiery mountain, and elves, sir. I listened because I couldn't help myself, if you know what I mean. Lord bless me, sir, but I do love tales of that sort. And I believe them too, whatever Ted may say. Elves, sir, I would dearly love to see them. Couldn't you take me to see elves, sir, when you go?
Suddenly Gandalf laughed.
Come inside,
He shouted, and putting out both his arms, he lifted the astonished Sam, shears, grass clippings and all, right through the window, and stood him on the floor.
Take you to see elves, eh?
He said, eyeing Sam closely, but with a smile flickering on his face.
So you heard that Mr. Frodo is going away?
I did, sir. And that's why I choked, which you heard seemingly. I tried not to, sir, but it burst out of me. I was so upset. It can't be helped, Sam,
said Frodo sadly. He had suddenly realized that flying out of the Shire would mean more painful partings than merely saying farewell to the familiar comforts of Bag End. I shall have to go, but, and here he looked hard at Sam, if you really care about me, you will keep that dead secret. See? If you don't, if you even breathe a word of what you've heard here, then I hope Gandalf will turn you into a spotted toad and fill the garden full of grass snakes. Sam fell to his knees, trembling.
Get up, Sam,
said Gandalf.
I have thought of something better than that. Something to shut your mouth and punish you properly for listening. You shall go away with Mr. Frodo.
Me, sir!
Cried Sam, springing up like a dog invited for a walk.
Me go and see elves and all! Oh, hooray!
He shouted, and then burst into tears.
You ought to go quietly, and you ought to go soon,
said Gandalf. 2 or 3 weeks had passed, and still Frodo made no sign of getting ready to go. I know, but it's difficult to do both, he objected. If I just vanished like Bilbo, the tale would be all over the Shire in no time.
Of course you mustn't vanish.
said Gandalf.
That wouldn't do at all. I said soon, not instantly. If you can think of any way of slipping out of the Shire without this being generally known, it will be worth a little delay. But you must not delay too long.
What about the autumn? On or after our birthday? Asked Frodo. I think I could probably make some arrangements by then.
To tell the truth, he was very reluctant to start, now that it had come to the point. Bag End seemed a more desirable residence than it had for years, and he wanted to savour as much as he could of his last summer in the Shire. When autumn came, he knew that part at least of his heart would think more kindly of journeying, as it always did in that season. He had indeed privately made up his mind to leave on his 50th birthday. Bilbo's 128th. It seemed somehow the proper day on which to set out and follow him. Following Bilbo was uppermost in his mind, and the one thing that made the thought of leaving bearable. He thought as little as possible about the ring, and where it might lead him in the end. But he did not tell all his thoughts to Gandalf. What the wizard guessed was always difficult to tell. He looked at Frodo and smiled.
Very well,
He said,
I think that will do. But it must not be any later. I'm getting very anxious. In the meanwhile, do take care and don't let out any hint of where you are going. And see that Sam Gamgee does not talk. If he does, I really shall turn him into a toad.
As for where I'm going, said Frodo, it would be difficult to give that away, for I have no clear idea myself yet.
Don't be absurd,
said Gandalf.
I'm not warning you against leaving an address at the post office, but you are leaving the Shire, and that should not be known until you are far away. And you must go, or at least set out, either north, south, west, or east, and the direction should certainly not be known.
I've been so taken up with the thought of leaving Bag End and of saying farewell that I have never even considered the direction,
said Frodo.
For where am I to go? And by what shall I steer? What is to be my quest? Bilbo went to find a treasure, there and back again. But I go to lose one, and not return as far as I can see.
But you cannot see very far,
said Gandalf.
Neither can I. It may be your task to find the cracks of doom, but that quest may be for others. I do not know. At any rate, you are not ready for that long road yet.
No, indeed,
said Frodo.
But in the meantime, what course am I to take?
Towards danger, but not too rashly, nor too straight,
answered the wizard.
If you want my advice, make for Rivendell. That journey should not prove too perilous, though the road is less easy than it was, and it will grow worse as the year fails.
Rivendell,
said Frodo.
Very good. I will go east, and I will make for Rivendell. I will take Sam to visit the elves. He will be delighted.
He spoke lightly, but his heart was moved suddenly with the desire to see the house of Elrond Half-Elven and breathe the air of that deep valley where many of the fair folk still dwelt in peace. One summer's evening, an astonishing piece of news reached the Ivy Bush and Green Dragon. Giants and the other portents on the borders of the Shire were forgotten for more important matters. Mr. Frodo was selling Bag End. Indeed, he had already sold it to the Sackville Bagginses.
For a nice bit too,
said some.
at a bargain price,
said others.
And that's more likely when Mistress Lobelia is the buyer.
Otho had died some years before, at the ripe but disappointed age of 102. Just why Mr. Frodo was selling his beautiful hole was even more debatable than the price. A few held the theory, supported by nods and hints, of Mr. Baggins himself, that Frodo's money was running out. He was going to leave Hobbiton and live in a quiet way on the proceeds of the sale down in Buckland among his Brandybuck relations. Some added. But so firmly fixed had the notion of the immeasurable wealth of the Bagginses of Bag End become that most found this hard to believe, harder than any other reason or unreason that their fancy could suggest. To most, it suggested a dark and yet unrevealed plot by Gandalf. Though he kept himself very quiet and did not go about by day, it was well known that he was hiding up in Bag End. But however a removal might fit with the designs of his wizardry, there was no doubt about the fact. Frodo Baggins was going back to Buckland.
Yes, I shall be moving this autumn,
he said.
Mary Brandybuck is looking out for a nice hole for me,
or perhaps a small house. As a matter of fact, with Mary's help, he had already chosen and bought a little house at Crickhollow in the country beyond Bucklebury. To all but Sam, he pretended he was going to settle down there permanently. The decision to set out eastwards had suggested the idea to him, for Buckland was on the eastern borders of the Shire, and as he had lived there in childhood, his going back would at least seem credible. Gandalf stayed in the Shire for over 2 months. Then one evening, at the end of June, soon after Frodo's plan had been finally arranged, he suddenly announced that he was going off again the next morning.
Only for a short while, I hope,
He said.
but I'm going down beyond the southern borders to get some news if I can. I have been idle longer than I should.
He spoke lightly, but it seemed to Frodo that he looked rather worried. Has anything happened? He said.
Well, no, but I have heard something that has made me anxious and needs looking into. I think it's necessary, after all, for you to get off at once. I shall come back immediately, or at least send word. In the meantime, stick to your plan. But be more careful than ever, especially of the ring. Let me impress on you once more. Don't use it.
He went off at dawn.
I may be back any day.
He said.
At the very latest, I shall come back to the farewell party. I think, after all, you may need my company on the road.
At first, Frodo was a good deal disturbed, and wondered often what Gandalf could have heard. But his uneasiness wore off, and in the fine weather he forgot his troubles for a while. The Shire had seldom seen so fair a summer, or so rich an autumn. The trees were laden with apples, honey was dripping from the combs, and the corn was tall and full. Autumn was well underway before Frodo began to worry about Gandalf again. September was passing, and there was still no news of him. The birthday and the removal drew nearer, and still he did not come, or send word. Bag End began to be busy. Some of Frodo's friends came to stay and help him with the packing. There was Fredegar Bolger and Folko Boffin, and of course his special friends Pippin Tuke and Merry Brandybuck. Between them, they turned the whole place upside down. On September 20th, 2 covered carts went off laden to Buckland, conveying the furniture and goods that Frodo had not sold to his new home, by way of the Brandywine Bridge. The next day, Frodo became really anxious and kept a constant lookout for Gandalf. Thursday, his birthday morning, dawned as fair and clear as it had long ago for Bilbo's great party. Still, Gandalf did not appear. In the evening, Frodo gave his farewell feast. It was quite small, just a dinner for himself and his 4 helpers. But he was troubled, and fell in no mood for it. The thought that he would so soon have to part with his young friends weighed on his heart. He wondered how he would break it to them. The 4 younger hobbits were, however, in high spirits, and the party soon became very cheerful in spite of Gandalf's absence. The dining room was bare except for a table and chairs, but the food was good, and there was good wine. Frodo's wine had not been included in the sale to the Sackville Bagginses.
Whatever happens to the rest of my stuff when the SBs get their claws on it, at any rate, I have found a good home for this,
said Frodo as he drained his glass. It was the last drop of Old Wynyards. When they had sung many songs and talked of many things they had done together, they toasted Bilbo's birthday, and then they drank his health and Frodo's together according to Frodo's custom. Then they went out for a sniff of air and glimpse of the stars, and then they went to bed. Frodo's party was over, and Gandalf had not come. The next morning they were busy packing another cart with the remainder of the luggage. Merry took charge of this, and drove off with Fatty, that is, Fredegar Bolger.
Someone must get these and warm the house before you arrive.
Said Merry.
Well, see you later. The day after tomorrow if you don't go to sleep on the way.
Folko went home after lunch, but Pippin remained behind. Frodo was restless and anxious, listening in vain for a sound of Gandalf. He decided to wait until nightfall. After that, if Gandalf wanted him urgently, he would go to Crickhollow, and might even get there first, for Frodo was going on foot. His plan, for pleasure and a last look of the Shire as much as any other reason, was to walk from Hobbiton to Bucklebury Ferry, taking it fairly easy.
I shall get myself a bit into training too,
he said, looking at himself in a dusty mirror in the half-empty hall. He had not done any strenuous walking for a long time, and the reflection looked rather flabby, he thought. After lunch, the Sackville Bagginses, Lobelia, and her sandy-haired son Lotho turned up, much to Frodo's annoyance.
Ours at last,
said Lobelia as she stepped inside. It was not polite nor strictly true, for the sale of Bag End did not take effect until midnight. But Lobelia can perhaps be forgiven. She had been obliged to wait about 77 years longer for Bag End than she once hoped. And she was now 100 years old. Anyway, she had come to see that nothing she had paid for had been carried off, and she wanted the keys. It took a long while to satisfy her, as she had brought a complete inventory with her, and went right through it. In the end she departed with Lotho and the spare key, and the promise that the other key would be left at the Gamgees in Bagshot Row. She snorted, and showed plainly that she thought the Gamgees capable of plundering the whole during the night. Frodo did not offer her any tea. He took his own tea with Pippin and Sam Gamgee in the kitchen. It had been officially announced that Sam was coming back to Buckland,
To do for Mr. Frodo, and look after his bit of garden.
an arrangement that was approved by the gaffer, though it did not console him for the prospect of having Lobelia as a neighbour.
Our last meal at Bag End,
said Frodo, pushing back his chair. They left the washing up for Lobelia. Pippin and Sam strapped up their 3 packs and piled them in the porch. Pippin went out for a last stroll in the garden. Sam disappeared. The sun went down. Bag End seemed sad and gloomy and dishevelled. Frodo wandered round the familiar rooms and saw the light of the sunset fade on the walls and shadows creep out of the corners. It grew slowly dark indoors. He went out and walked down to the gate at the bottom of the path, and then on a short way down the hill road. He half expected to see Gandalf come striding up through the dusk. The sky was clear and the stars were glowing bright.
it's going to be a fine night,
He said aloud.
That's good for a beginning. I feel like walking. I can't bear any more hanging about. I'm going to start. And Gandalf must follow me.
He turned to go back, and then stopped, for he heard voices just round the corner by the end of Bagshot Row. One voice was certainly the old gaffer's. The other was strange, and somehow unpleasant. He could not make out what it said, but he heard the gaffer's answers, which were rather shrill. The old man seemed put out.
No, Mr. Baggins has gone away. Went this morning, and my Sam went with him. And anyway, all his stuff went. Yet sold out and gone, I tell you. But why? Why's none of my business or yours. Where to? That ain't no secret. He's moved to Bucklebury or some such place, away down yonder. Yes, it is. A tidy way. I've never been so far myself. They'd queer folks in Buckland. No, I can't give no message. Good night to you.
Footsteps went away down the hill. Frodo wondered vaguely why the fact that they did not come up on the hill seemed a great relief.
I am sick of questions and curiosity about my doings, I suppose.
He thought.
What an inquisitive lot they all are.
He had half a mind to go and ask the gaffer who the inquirer was, but he thought better, or worse of it, and turned and walked quickly back to Bag End. Pippin was sitting on his pack in the porch. Sam was not there. Frodo stepped inside the dark door.
Sam?
He called.
Sam! Time!
Came the answer from far within, followed soon by Sam himself, wiping his mouth. He had been saying farewell to the beer barrel in the cellar.
All aboard, Sam?
Said Frodo.
Yes, sir. I'll ask for a bit now, sir.
Frodo shut and locked the round door, and gave the key to Sam.
Run down with this to your home, Sam.
He said.
Then cut along the row and meet us as quick as you can at the gate in the lane beyond the meadows. We're not going through the village tonight. Too many ears pricking and eyes prying.
Sam ran off at full speed.
Well, now we're off at last,
said Frodo. They shouldered their packs and took up their sticks and walked round the corner to the west side of Bag End.
Goodbye,
said Frodo, looking at the dark blank windows. He waved his hand, and then turned, and following Bilbo if he had known it, hurried after Peregrine down the garden path. They jumped over the low place in the hedge at the bottom, and took to the fields, passing into the darkness like a rustle in the grasses. At the bottom of the hill on its western side they came to the gate opening on to a narrow lane. There they halted and adjusted the straps for their packs. Presently Sam appeared, trotting quickly and breathing hard. His heavy pack was hoisted high on his shoulders, and he had put on his head a tall, shapeless felt bag, which he called a hat. In the gloom, he looked very much like a dwarf.
I'm sure you have given me all the heaviest stuff,
said Frodo.
I pity snails, and all that carry their homes on their backs. I could take a lot more yet, sir. My packet is quite light,
said Sam stoutly and untruthfully.
No, you don't, Sam,
said Pippin.
It is good for him. He's got nothing except what he ordered us to pack. He's been slack lately, and he'll feel the weight less when he's walked off some of his own. Be kind to a poor old hobbit,
laughed Frodo.
I shall be as thin as a willow wand, I'm sure, before I get to Buckland.
But I was talking nonsense. I suspect you have taken more than your share, Sam. And I shall look into it at our next packing. He picked up his stick again.
Well, we all like walking in the dark,
he said.
So let's put some miles behind us before bed.
For a short way they followed the lane westwards. Then leaving it they turned left and took quietly to the fields again. They went in single file, along hedgerows and the borders of coppices, and night fell dark about them. In their dark cloaks they were as invisible as if they all had magic rings. Since they were all hobbits, and were trying to be silent, they made no noise that even hobbits would hear. Even the wild things in the fields and woods hardly noticed their passing. After some time they crossed the water, west of Hobbiton, by a narrow plank bridge. The stream was there no more than a winding black ribbon, bordered with leaning Ardler trees. A mile or two further south they hastily crossed the great road from the Brandywine Bridge. They were now in the Tukeland, and bending southeastwards they made for the Green Hill country. As they began to climb its first slopes, they looked back and saw the lamps in Hobbiton far off twinkling in the gentle valley of the water. Soon it disappeared in the folds of the darkened land, and was followed by Bywater beside its grey pool. When the light of the last farm was far behind, peeping among the trees, Frodo turned and waved a hand in farewell. I wonder if I shall ever look down into that valley again, he said quietly. When they had walked for about 3 hours, they rested. The night was clear, cool and starry, but smoke-like wisps of mist were creeping up the hillsides from the stream and deep meadows. Thin-clad birches swaying in a light wind above their heads made a black net against the pale sky. They ate a very frugal supper, for hobbits, and then went on again. Soon they struck a narrow road that went rolling up and down, fading grey into the darkness ahead, the road to Woodhall and Stock and the Bucklebury Ferry. It climbed away from the main road in the water valley and wound over the skirts of the green hills, towards Woody End, a wild corner of the East Farthing. After a while they plunged into a deeply cloven track between tall trees that rustled their dry leaves in the night. It was very dark. At first they talked, or hummed a tune softly together, being now far away from inquisitive ears. Then they marched on in silence, and Pippin began to lag behind. At last they began to climb a steep slope. He stopped and yawned.
I am so sleepy,
he said.
that soon I shall fall down on the road. Are you going to sleep on your legs? It's nearly midnight. I thought you liked walking in the dark,
said Frodo.
But there is no great hurry. Mary expects us sometime the day after tomorrow, but that leaves us nearly 2 days more. We'll halt at the first likely spot,
said Sam. Sam knew the land well within 20 miles of Hobbiton, but that was the limit of his geography. Just over the top of the hill, they came on the patch of fir wood. Leaving the road, they went into the deep, resin-scented darkness of the trees, and gathered dead sticks and cones to make a fire. Soon they had a merry crackle of flame at the foot of a large fir tree, and they sat round it for a while, until they began to nod. Then, each in an angle of the great tree's roots, they curled up in their cloaks and blankets, and were soon fast asleep. They set no watch. Even Frodo feared no danger yet, for they were still in the heart of the Shire. A few creatures came and looked at them,